August 15, 1979, 2:30 p.m. Industrial Light and Magic Offices, San Rafael, California. Harrison Ford walked into George Lucas's cluttered office holding the latest draft of The Empire Strikes Back script. His face was stone cold. His jaw was set. And the words that came out of his mouth in the next 60 seconds would create the biggest creative battle in Star Wars history. "George," Harrison said, placing the script on Lucas's desk with deliberate force, "we need to talk about Han Solo, and you're not going to like what I have to say." George Lucas looked up from the storyboards he was reviewing for the Hoth battle sequence. At 35, Lucas was at the height of his creative powers. Star Wars had made him the most successful filmmaker in Hollywood. The Empire Strikes Back was going to be even bigger, even better. Everything was going according to plan. Everything except Harrison Ford. "What's the problem, Harrison?" Lucas asked, not looking up from his drawings. "The script is locked. We start filming in 3 weeks. Harrison Ford sat down across from Lucas and leaned forward. What he said next would change everything. "That's the problem, George. Han Solo doesn't die in this script. He should. And if you don't kill him in this movie, you're going to ruin the entire saga." The silence that followed was deafening. George Lucas slowly put down his pencil and looked at Harrison Ford like he had just suggested burning down the Death Star sets. "Kill Han Solo," Lucas said, his voice rising slightly. "Harrison, do you understand what you're saying? Han Solo is one of the most beloved characters in the galaxy. Kids love him. Adults love him. You want me to kill him?" "Yes," Harrison said without hesitation. "That's exactly what I want you to do." What happened in the next 45 minutes would be remembered as one of the most intense creative arguments in Hollywood history. But to understand why Harrison Ford was willing to risk his career by demanding his own character's death, you need to understand what was really happening behind the scenes of The Empire Strikes Back. The problem started 6 months earlier, in February 1979, when Harrison first read Lee Brackett's initial draft of the Empire screenplay. Brackett, a legendary science fiction writer, had created a script that was dramatically different from what audiences would eventually see. In her version, Han Solo was a secondary character, a supporting player in Luke Skywalker's hero's journey. Harrison hated it. "I read that first draft and I couldn't believe it." Harrison later recalled in a rare interview. "Han Solo was just standing around delivering exposition, making jokes. He wasn't a real character anymore. He was a sidekick." But Harrison's problems with The Empire Strikes Back went deeper than just screen time. As an actor, he understood something about Han Solo that George Lucas didn't seem to grasp. The character's journey was complete. Han had gone from selfish smuggler to selfless hero. He had found love with Princess Leia. He had joined the rebellion. There was nowhere left for the character to go. From an actor's perspective, Harrison explained to Lucas that day, Han Solo's arc is finished. He's learned everything he needs to learn. He's become everything he needs to become. If you keep him alive just to keep him alive, you're going to turn him into a parody of himself. George Lucas disagreed violently. "Harrison, you don't understand the bigger picture." Lucas shot back. "Star Wars isn't just one movie. It's not even just 3 movies. This is a saga that could go on for decades. Han Solo is a crucial part of that future. I can't just kill him because you think his story is done, but that's exactly why you should kill him." Harrison stood up, his frustration boiling over. "George, you created something beautiful with Han Solo. He's a real character with a real journey. Don't cheapen that by dragging him through movie after movie just because he sells toys." The mention of toys hit a nerve. By 1979, Star Wars merchandise was generating more money than the movies themselves. Han Solo was one of the most popular action figures. Killing him would cost Lucasfilm millions of dollars in potential revenue. "This isn't about toys, Harrison," Lucas said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "This is about storytelling. And the story I want to tell includes Han Solo." "Then you're telling the wrong story," Harrison replied. "And you're going to regret it." The argument might have ended there, with both men agreeing to disagree, but Harrison Ford wasn't finished. What he said next crossed a line that would strain his relationship with George Lucas for years to come. "George, do you want to know what I really think?" I think you're afraid to take risks with your own creation. You're so worried about protecting Star Wars that you've forgotten what made it special in the first place. You used to be willing to kill characters that mattered. You used to understand that death gives meaning to life. Now you're just playing it safe. George Lucas stood up from his desk. His face was red. His hands were shaking with anger. "How dare you?" Lucas said. His voice low but dangerous. "How dare you tell me I don't understand my own creation? I spent 3 years of my life creating this universe. I know these characters better than you ever will. And I'm not going to let some actor who got lucky with one role tell me how to tell my story." "Lucky?" Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "George, I didn't get lucky with Han Solo. I created him. Half the character you see on screen came from me. The humor, the swagger, the way he talks, that wasn't in your script. That came from me understanding who this character really was. It was true, and George Lucas knew it." Harrison's improvisations had become some of the most memorable moments in Star Wars. "I know," instead of "I love you too." The casual way he handled his blaster, the sideways smirks that made audiences fall in love with Han Solo. Harrison hadn't just played the character, he had helped create him. But Lucas wasn't about to admit that in the middle of a heated argument. "You're an actor, Harrison," Lucas said coldly. "A very good actor, but you're not a storyteller. You don't see the big picture. You only care about your own performance, and you only care about your own empire." Harrison shot back. "This isn't about storytelling anymore, George. This is about building a franchise that will make you rich for the rest of your life, and you're willing to compromise the integrity of your own story to do it." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Both men knew there was truth to it. Star Wars had become bigger than art. It had become a business empire, and business empires don't kill their most profitable characters. George Lucas walked to the window and stared out at the parking lot of Industrial Light and Magic. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he finally turned around, his expression was different. Sadder, more thoughtful. "Harrison," he said quietly, "what if you're wrong? What if killing Han Solo ruins everything? What if it's the mistake that destroys Star Wars forever?" Harrison Ford softened his tone. For the first time in the argument, he seemed to understand the enormous pressure George Lucas was under. "George," Harrison said, "what if I'm right? What if keeping him alive is the mistake that ruins everything? What if playing it safe is what destroys Star Wars forever?" It was a question that would haunt George Lucas for the next 3 years. The immediate result of their argument was a compromise that satisfied no one. Instead of killing Han Solo, Lucas decided to freeze him in carbonite at the end of The Empire Strikes Back. It was a brilliant narrative solution. Han would be in mortal danger without actually dying, giving the audience the emotional impact Harrison wanted without the financial risk Lucas feared. But Harrison wasn't satisfied. "Freezing him isn't killing him, George," Harrison said. "When Lucas presented the carbonite solution, you're still playing it safe. You're still more worried about the sequel than you are about this story." "It's the best I can do," Lucas replied. "Take it or leave it." Harrison took it, but the fight was far from over. The tension between Harrison Ford and George Lucas became legendary on the set of The Empire Strikes Back. Director Irvin Kershner found himself playing mediator between his star and the creator of the saga. Harrison and George barely spoke to each other during filming. Kershner later revealed, "When they did talk, you could feel the electricity in the air. It wasn't hostile exactly, but it was intense. They both cared so much about the story that they couldn't find common ground." The carbonite freezing scene became a perfect metaphor for their relationship. Harrison, dressed as Han Solo, was literally frozen in place while George Lucas controlled his fate from behind the camera. The visual irony wasn't lost on anyone. But Harrison's performance in that scene, the fear, the love, the resignation, was some of the finest acting of his career. He channeled his frustration with Lucas into Han Solo's final moments of consciousness, creating a scene that would be remembered as one of the most powerful in the entire saga. When The Empire Strikes Back was released in May 1980, critics and audiences universally praised the carbonite freezing sequence. Harrison's argument had been proven right. Putting Han Solo in genuine jeopardy had elevated the entire story. But George Lucas still wasn't convinced about killing the character permanently. The final battle between Harrison Ford and George Lucas came 3 years later, during pre-production for Return of the Jedi. By then, their creative differences had hardened into personal animosity. "I don't want to do Return of the Jedi," Harrison told Lucas during their first meeting about the third film. "Unless you're willing to kill Han Solo, I don't see the point." "Harrison, we've been through this," Lucas replied, exhausted by years of the same argument. "And Solo lives. That's final. Then find another actor," Harrison said, getting up to leave, "because I won't be part of turning Han Solo into a cartoon character." It was the closest Harrison Ford ever came to walking away from Star Wars. For 2 weeks, Lucasfilm actually explored the possibility of recasting Han Solo for Return of the Jedi. Screen tests were conducted. Agents were called. The entertainment press began speculating about who could replace Harrison Ford. But ultimately, George Lucas blinked first. "We can't make Return of the Jedi without Harrison," Lucas admitted to producer Gary Kurtz. "He is Han Solo. No one else can play that role." The compromise they reached for Return of the Jedi was even more unsatisfying than the carbonite solution. Han Solo would live, but he would be diminished, reduced to comic relief and romantic subplot. Everything Harrison Ford had feared would happen to the character did happen. "Watching Return of the Jedi was heartbreaking for me," Harrison later confessed. "Not because it was a bad movie. It wasn't, but because I could see what Han Solo had become. He was a shadow of the character from the first 2 films." The critical and commercial success of Return of the Jedi proved that George Lucas had been right about the business side of the equation. Audiences loved seeing Han Solo alive and well. Toy sales soared. The Star Wars empire was secure. But Harrison Ford's creative instincts had been proven right too. Han Solo's character arc was indeed complete after The Empire Strikes Back. Everything that came after felt anticlimactic. The irony of their 3-year battle became clear decades later, when George Lucas finally gave Harrison Ford what he had been asking for all along. In The Force Awakens, Han Solo dies, killed by his own son in a scene that gave the character the meaningful death Harrison had always believed he deserved. "George called me before The Force Awakens came out," Harrison revealed in 2015. He said, "You were right about Han Solo. You were right 36 years ago." It was one of the most satisfying conversations of my entire career, but the victory felt bittersweet. By then, Harrison Ford was 73 years old. George Lucas had sold Star Wars to Disney. The saga they had both cared so much about was in other hands. "I wonder sometimes what would have happened if George had listened to me back in 1979, Harrison mused. "Would the saga have been different? Better? I don't know, but I think it would have been braver." George Lucas, for his part, has never publicly regretted his decision to keep Han Solo alive through the original trilogy. But friends say he was deeply affected by Harrison's criticism, particularly the accusation that he had become too cautious with his own creation. "George is an artist first and a businessman second," says Rick McCallum, who produced the Star Wars prequels. But the success of Star Wars put him in an impossible position. Everyone had an opinion about what he should do with his creation. Harrison's opinion just happened to be the most passionate. The fight between Harrison Ford and George Lucas represents something larger than just a creative disagreement between 2 Hollywood professionals. It was a battle between artistic integrity and commercial success, between taking risks and playing it safe, between serving the story and serving the franchise. Both men were right. Harrison was right that Han Solo's story was complete after The Empire Strikes Back, and that keeping him alive diminished the character. George was right that killing Han Solo would have been a massive financial risk that could have jeopardized the entire saga. But the real winner of their legendary argument was the audience. The tension between Harrison's artistic demands and George's commercial concerns pushed both men to create better work. The Empire Strikes Back is widely considered the best Star Wars film precisely because it was willing to put beloved characters in genuine danger. The carbonite freezing scene, born out of their creative conflict, became one of the most memorable moments in cinema history. Han Solo's "I know" response to Leia's "I love you," an improvisation Harrison made because he felt the scripted response was too sentimental, became an iconic piece of movie dialogue. Even their failure to find common ground on Return of the Jedi served a purpose. The compromises that weakened Han Solo's character in that film highlighted the importance of the creative battles Harrison had been fighting all along. Today, both Harrison Ford and George Lucas speak respectfully about their legendary argument. They acknowledge that their creative differences, however painful at the time, ultimately served the story they were both trying to tell. Harrison cared about Han Solo as much as I did, George Lucas admitted in a 2019 interview. We just had different ideas about what was best for the character. In retrospect, we were both right in different ways. George created something magical with Star Wars, Harrison Ford said in response. I just wanted to make sure that magic didn't get diluted by commercial considerations. Sometimes that meant fighting for what I believed in, even when it made me unpopular. The argument that started on August 15, 1979, officially ended on December 18, 2015, when The Force Awakens was released and Han Solo finally got the meaningful death Harrison Ford had been advocating for since The Empire Strikes Back. It had taken 36 years, but Harrison had finally won the fight. The legacy of their creative battle extends far beyond Star Wars. It proved that actors could be more than just performers. They could be creative partners who understood their characters as well as the writers and directors who created them. It showed that fighting for artistic integrity, even at personal and professional cost, could ultimately serve the greater good of the story. Most importantly, it demonstrated that the best creative work often comes from conflict, not consensus. The tension between Harrison Ford's artistic instincts and George Lucas's commercial concerns didn't destroy Star Wars, it made it stronger. The next time you watch The Empire Strikes Back and see Han Solo frozen in carbonite, remember that you're watching the result of one of Hollywood's greatest creative battles, a fight between two men who cared so much about a fictional character that they were willing to risk their friendship to get his story right. And when you watch The Force Awakens and see Han Solo's final scene, remember that you're watching the resolution of an argument that lasted nearly 4 decades. Harrison Ford finally got his wish. Han Solo got the meaningful death he deserved, and George Lucas, in the end, admitted that his star had been right all along. That's not just the story of an argument between an actor and a director. That's the story of how creative conflict, when it comes from a place of genuine caring, can make art better. That's the story of why Harrison Ford's biggest fight with George Lucas changed Star Wars forever.